What if the most unsettling thing about Norman Rockwell's America is not its idealization, but the fact that perception inside it becomes too quickly resolved before it has time to behave as perception normally behaves, before the eye has time to search, hesitate, and construct meaning through uncertainty? In Rockwell's visual system, the viewer is not placed in front of an open field of interpretation, but inside a structure where interpretive work has already been partially completed, and the act of looking becomes a process of confirmation rather than exploration. When I look at Rockwell, there is a specific perceptual experience that is difficult to ignore. It feels as if the image already anticipates the route of my attention, not emotionally anticipating it, but structurally anticipating it, as if perception is being guided before it has time to become subjective. Recognition happens almost immediately. The eye stabilizes before analysis begins. This produces a compression of perceptual time in which interpretation is no longer something that unfolds, but something that is already completed at the moment of entry. The effect is not simply clarity, but a peculiar cognitive inversion. The image becomes easier to organize than reality itself, and reality outside the image begins to feel comparatively unstable, less structured, more noisy. In ordinary visual experience, perception is unstable. It moves through space in a nonlinear way, testing hierarchies of importance, returning to peripheral details, delaying closure until sufficient information is accumulated. Rockwell systematically reduces this delay, not by eliminating detail, but by eliminating ambiguity within detail. Objects do not remain neutral elements of the environment. They are pre-assigned functional roles within a perceptual hierarchy. A chair is already social positioning. A newspaper is already narrative orientation. A gesture is already completed intention. Each element is explained before the viewer has the chance to interpret it. This produces a structure in which meaning does not emerge gradually, but appears already stabilized at the moment of perception. This becomes clearer if placed against a contrasting perceptual logic, for example, An Interior by Edward Hopper. When I look at Hopper, I feel like I am trespassing in someone's solitude, not observing it, but entering a space that does not fully allow me to stabilize my presence inside it. In Hopper, spatial relations do not immediately resolve, and the eye remains in a state of delayed stabilization, unable to fully determine emotional hierarchy within the frame. The image requires time to assemble itself into meaning. In Rockwell, this delay is almost entirely eliminated. Perception does not unfold. It arrives already assembled. Emotional states behave as legible units rather than ambiguous processes. This shift is crucial because it removes the temporal instability normally required for interpretation. Emotion becomes something that does not emerge, but is recognized. Even spatial organization participates in this early closure of perception. Background elements rarely function as neutral zones. Instead, they continuously contribute to perceptual guidance, eliminating what would normally be low-relevance areas in the visual field. In Rockwell, almost no part of the image remains perceptually inactive. When minor tension appears inside the scene, it is rapidly stabilized through compositional mechanisms. Balanced lighting, symmetry, regulated distance. Any instability is immediately translated into a managed form. The perceptual consequence of this system is a reduction of interpretive effort to near zero. The viewer is not required to construct meaning through hesitation, They are placed inside a fully pre-structured field of readability. This is where the perceptual difference becomes noticeable not only intellectually, but bodily. The eye stops searching earlier than it usually does, and this early stopping point itself begins to feel unusual. Rockwell creates a condition in which ambiguity itself becomes structurally rare, almost absent as a perceptual option. And this is where the discomfort begins, not in what is shown, but in how quickly the shown becomes already known. Because the feeling is not, "this is artificial," it is closer to a perceptual realization that nothing inside the image is ever allowed to remain unresolved long enough to become uncertain. Rockwell does not construct a scene that represents America. He constructs a system of perceptual closure in which attention is guided toward resolution before uncertainty can fully form. What remains after viewing is not an image of America, but an awareness of how easily perception can be led into completion before it has had time to become experience. Rockwell's significance lies not only in what he depicts, but in the specific perceptual conditions his images produce. His works do not simply present scenes of American life. They regulate the very process through which those scenes become cognitively available to the viewer. The image arrives already organized. Attention is guided effortlessly. Emotional hierarchy is clarified in advance, and ambiguity is reduced before it has time to accumulate into genuine uncertainty. The experience of viewing Rockwell can feel strangely disproportionate to the apparent simplicity of the image itself. The viewer is not confronted with complexity. On the contrary, the image is processed with unusual ease. This ease itself becomes psychologically noticeable because ordinary perception rarely functions so smoothly. Real environments contain conflicting signals, unstable emotional priorities, irrelevant details, and disruptions of attention. Reality usually requires continuous perceptual negotiation. Rockwell minimizes this negotiation. The viewer is placed inside a world in which interpretation stabilizes almost immediately, creating a specific form of perceptual reassurance. The image continuously confirms orientation within the scene. There is rarely any need to decide where to look, what is central, or how emotional emphasis should be distributed. The painting predefines these parameters. This logic extends beyond individual composition and reflects a broader tendency within American realism. Behind the external diversity of the movement lies a persistent concern with legibility, with transforming visual experience into structured and socially recognizable meaning. Within this tradition, everyday life is repeatedly rendered into a state of perceptual clarity and emotional orientation. Different artists within American realism approach this task in different ways, but they share a common question. How long can ambiguity remain active before an image resolves it into clarity? How much uncertainty is acceptable within a scene before it ceases to feel meaningful? Rockwell occupies one of the most radical positions within this spectrum, as his paintings aim to eliminate interpretive instability with exceptional speed. Even minimal tensions within a scene are absorbed into overall compositional coherence. Gesture, lighting, spatial relations, facial expression, and narrative emphasis all work to prevent perceptual drift. Attention is continuously directed toward stabilization. In contemporary visual culture, this principle gains additional relevance. Digital interfaces, advertising systems, and algorithmically organized information feeds operate according to a similar logic. An image must be read quickly, without delay, without prolonged interpretation. What succeeds visually is what minimizes cognitive friction and provides immediate orientation. Under such conditions, prolonged ambiguity becomes increasingly unfamiliar. Contemporary viewers are gradually adapted to environments that reward accelerated recognition and rapid closure of meaning. Ambiguity ceases to feel like openness and begins to register as perceptual inefficiency. Rockwell is important not because he superficially anticipates digital aesthetics, but because he reveals a more fundamental mechanism of attentional organization. His work demonstrates how easily perception accepts coherence when coherence is delivered quickly enough. The viewer encounters not only an image, but a model of perception in which uncertainty is regulated before it can develop into independent experience. Within this context, the lingering effect of Rockwell's work is often difficult to articulate precisely. The discomfort does not arise from artificiality or sentimentality as such. It is connected to the realization that the image partially completes the perceptual process on behalf of the viewer. The act of looking becomes compressed. Recognition precedes subjective exploration, reducing the space of immediate experience. In comments on video like this, a recurring assumption often appears that it must be generated by artificial intelligence. This reaction is usually not caused by a lack of meaning, but by the opposite: a high degree of structural coherence and continuity. Instead of following the internal movement of thought, part of the audience interprets clarity itself as a sign of automated production. A cultural inversion emerges in which precision and cohesion are perceived as unnatural to human thinking. What is being attempted here is to sustain a thought in its sequential unfolding, without simplification or fragmentation. If this way of speaking about images and perception resonates, you can subscribe to the channel. Future discussions will move beyond individual artistic examples and address the broader structure of how vision and understanding themselves are formed.